Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Yo, what's poppin', Rush Nation? Yep, we're there. We are within touching distance of the fantasy playoffs. 3 weeks to go in most cases. It's come round like a freight train on, I was going to say speed, but that's a poor analogy because freight trains are never fast. Anyway, as always, we're off the rails and it's 38 seconds in. Big man, how are we?
It's good. So I'm just doing the old sharing.
It's all right. You sharing's caring.
To let people know that we're live. Yeah, I'm all grand. It's another week. Apologies for being a day late. I had a corporate event in London I had to be in yesterday. Sitting with lots of government folk for my job. So yeah.
Hang on a minute. Wait. Hold up. Corporate event yesterday with government folk. Were you at the farmers' rally? Is that what happened?
So funny enough, I did see some tractors, and I was not very far from Westminster. So there was definitely I was not associated with that event, but I did happen to see some of the demonstrations and bits and pieces from where I was.
Okay, fair enough. I was just going to say the quiff's too quiffy today for a flat cap to have been worn to the Farmers' March yesterday is all I'm saying. So just another reason, Rush Nation, why you need to come over to YouTube, hit the like and subscribe, and join us on this glorious video occasion every week. Murf and I do, and Murf more than once, twice, 3 times a fantasy degenerate.
That's going to be the follow-up to Lionel Richie's once, twice, 3 times a lady.
That's what I'm saying. I could have sung it and nailed it, but I'm still recovering from my stint on IR, I think, and it just didn't come out vocally. Mate, I cannot believe we are this close to hopefully filling the docks up, right? It's come so fast.
There. We're 6 years. 6 years, 6 weeks, six games left in the fantasy season, 3 in the regular season, 3 in the playoffs, hopefully, and then some ships. So yeah, it is always scary how quickly it goes. I'm getting a bit retrospective now, but I think this season has, I would say, for the first time in a while, it's felt the draft was a lot more important. So I know there's a lot of people talking about there's been a lot of injuries. I actually don't think there actually has been a lot of injuries, and there certainly hasn't been many injuries to top players. I think there was a lot at the start, so like the CMCs of this world being out and some of those top players like really early. But actually, I look at week to week with waiver wires, and I actually think this has been the worst year for waivers so far. I think there's been very few genuine contributors off waivers. There's a few, obviously. You look at Jordan Mason first half of the season. You look at Chuba Hubbard would be a good one. You've had a few, if Jameson Williams wasn't drafted in your league, you would have done all right to pick him up. I drafted him in a lot of places. Rashid Shaheed, very similar for a few weeks, would have got you there. But I would say maybe even Baker Mayfield as a fantasy quarterback might have got you there. But when you're looking at the names at the top of boards in terms of fantasy rankings, fantasy leading rankings, Chuba Hubbard is the only one in the top 24 that wasn't rostered at the start of the season in a fair amount of leagues. And in fact, he was taken in quite a few drafts because of what was going on with Jonathan Brooks. I look at the wide receivers, maybe Brian Thomas, if people weren't on him. That seems to be maybe JSN. I feel like he was probably over rostered more than most. Maybe Josh Downs. That might be about it. Khalil Shakir are probably like a few names, but then they're not shooting the lights out. They've been good, but they haven't been like Khalil Shakir has been fine. He's the wide receiver 21, like great, but in half-point PPR, he's had 2 weeks over 15. So he's been fine, but he's not been outstanding. Like, wide receiver-wise, I think it's been quite a flat year. So, Khalil Shakir in half-point PPR, right? He's the wide receiver 21. He has scored 100 points. He's right next to Marvin Harrison Jr. So, it doesn't feel like it's been revolutionary in terms of fantasy point scoring. So I think the fantasy point scoring has been a bit lower. So yeah, I would say that the drafts were more important. If you did well in your drafts, your players have stayed relatively healthy. You're probably in pretty good position. If you got trading early and started to do bits and pieces like that, you're probably in the right position. I feel like if you didn't draft well, the way to come back this season was significantly hard. Please put in the comments if I'm wrong and that's not the case. Then that feels like my observation is, and the feeling I get when I speak to people, and this might be biased because it's people talking to me, and people probably don't want to feel like they want to give me critical feedback, which is fine. I welcome it. I love critical feedback. I tend to get the feeling that the listeners who have listened to this show and have messaged me about what we've done through the off season and the prep feel pretty good about the leagues that are important to them for the most part. I feel like they took players that we talked about at good values that have done a good job for them. Alvin Kamara, Brian Robinson Jr., Chris Godwin for a few, first half of the season. So I do feel like we prepped our listeners pretty well. I feel like if you listen to the advice we gave, you should be in a pretty good spot. But I think now it's sharpening the pencils, and I think it's now those things of what do you do to basically ensure you win a title. You can't just go, well, okay, well, there hasn't been much on the waiver wire, so actually I just need to just get lucky and just hope everyone stays healthy. I mean, that's nice, but actually it's the roster pieces that you can do now if you're heading to the playoffs, and the pieces and the things that you can do that will help you get there. So, if you're part of the Patreon and part of the Patreon community, you've heard me on the Patreon cast about what my strategy would be here. You can subscribe to the Patreon, links in the chat. You can actually get a 1-week trial. So listen to the last few of those and you'll actually get a bit of context to what I'm talking about. They're still valid, even though they're a couple of weeks old. So I think that's really key. I think if you can nail your strategy now the next few weeks and then watch those streamers. We had Danny on a few weeks ago when you were on IR, and we were talking about the value of streaming and turning losses into wins through streaming. And I feel like that's been a good play this season. Danny was talking about some of the success he's had with streaming DSTs, kickers, and quarterbacks. So I think go back and listen to that, and we'll certainly give some advice over the coming weeks in that area as well.
Yeah, I think in one of my home dynasty leagues, admittedly it is dynasty, so the waiver is thinner, but I think probably 80% of my fab budget this year has been spent on streaming DSTs, and I've done it fairly well so far. I don't want to find something wooden. I don't want to curse myself, but because I'm in a strong place player-wise, I can afford to spend that fab on the DSTs as opposed to scrambling. But then that might be injury luck and stuff as well.
Well, you just need the Bucks DST now, and you're fine. Because the Bucks have the schedule coming in for the Bucks is chronically ridiculous. They have one game against a team with a winning record, which is the Chargers, and they've got most of the teams they're facing now are between 2 and 3 wins. I think 4 wins if you count the Saints. They've got the Saints at some point who are on 4 wins, but everyone else is 2 or 3 wins. They've got the Giants this week, they've got the Raiders, they've got Dallas, they've got Carolina twice, and they've got the Saints. That's 6 of their 7 final games. So you look at the Buccaneers' schedule, you ain't getting a better DST really. You can plug and play them for the rest of the season. Maybe you think about when the Bucks have got the Chargers, and maybe that's the 1 week you might want to get a second pivot, but you wouldn't drop the Bucks. I think that's week 14. It could be 15. Let me just have a quick goosey gander. It is week 15. So that's the only week. But for the final 3 weeks of the regular season, it's the Giants, the Panthers. So the Giants with Danny DeVito's long lost nephew, Tommy DeVito, in at quarterback. So, happy days. Then they've got Bryce Young, who, the day that he throws for 300 yards, I think the NFL will be forced to probably fold. And then you've got the Raiders. When you say that the Raiders are the best offense you've got over the next 3 weeks to play, that pretty much tells you where you're at. And then they got the Chargers, and then the playoffs, they've got Cooper Rush.
Nice.
And then Bryce Young again. And then the Saints week 18, which you don't have to worry about in most leagues. So, like, you look at that schedule, if you could just buy the Bucks now, and like that's it. You could just play them, and then week 15, you think, maybe I need a 1 week pivot. If you're on a bye, great. You don't have to worry about it. You can just forget it. And if you're not on a bye, then you're like, okay, so I need a 1 week pivot play. That's fine. But you can just plug and play the Bucks. Job done. And then you're sorted.
Not available.
I think because everyone's come to that realization of just how bad that schedule is. Yeah, I think I think you're gonna have to look at the week 3 matchup. So we'll do some bits and pieces over here the coming weeks, and we'll talk about that. In fact, we maybe can do a little bit of that tonight if we get some time.
Well, I've got the Commanders to plug in for the next 2 weeks because their matchups aren't terrible. So
if you got
on top of
Houston, you got the Washington Commanders, you got Pittsburgh, you're probably in another bad spot. All of those will kind of tie you over for the next few weeks.
Nicely. Talking of tying you over for the next few weeks, the New York Jets are heading towards Aaron Rodgers running the entire team because Joe Douglas has been fired.
Like, I have to be careful what I say here.
Is that because you're now being tended by the Giants? What's going on?
No, far from it. I think that did Joe Douglas do a good job? Not really. I think he did a terrible job. I think he hired a good coach. You can see how it's all fallen apart at the seams now that Robert Saleh's gone. Do I think Robert Saleh was good enough? I don't know. The problem was they brought Aaron Rodgers in. And so when you brought Aaron Rodgers in, you lifted the expectation. But I watched him at Tottenham in his final year with Green Bay, and his arm had gone. And I remember talking to people, and they were like, his arm's not gone. It's still got, he just was injured. And I was like, his arm's gone. Like, he just does not have, he's not there anymore. He's not at that elite level. And we're starting to see almost like what we saw with Ben Roethlisberger, like that sharp decline to a level which is mediocre. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is the reason they're not. I don't think Aaron Rodgers, that the skill level of quarterback, is the reason they're not winning games. I think Aaron Rodgers, the personality and the show and everything he brings with them, is a lot more of the reason than the culture. You've got a guy who's being paid how much it is, 160 million, whatever it is, over 3 years. And you've brought him in to change the culture to a winning culture. He's not done that, but he doesn't do the things that exude a winning culture. We've talked about this with Aaron Rodgers for years on this show. I've said I don't think he has a winning mentality. And I've questioned it for a long time on this show. Probably since the beginning, if I'm honest, nearly 900 episodes ago. Because, and he's won 2 MVPs. And it was like, he's MVPs. I was like, that's great. Like, they won regular season games in a crap division, which they puffed up and just, were going 6-0 in their division. And that's halfway to their 13-win seasons. It's like, yeah, congratulations. And then as soon as they played anyone good, they lost. And Aaron Rodgers doesn't beat good teams when he's trailing. It just doesn't. It's happened once in his entire career in the fourth quarter. It doesn't happen. And so we've talked about this. I'm not going to repeat the same record, but he goes on the Pat McAfee show regularly. And you're sitting there like, dude, you've won 3 games all season. Like, you've got to put your head down. You've got to, you can't be going out there and, talking and presenting yourself in this manner of, oh, look at me, I'm Aaron Rodgers, I'm the celebrity, I'm the star, I'm the highest paid player, and then not do the basics, which is go in, work. I'm not saying he doesn't work hard, but Here's something I put in the show sheet, right? They got 3 wins this season. They're literally, their season was on the line. If they win that game at the weekend, they got a really small sniff of making the playoffs. Given their schedule and they get on a bit of a roll, you never know what happens. Unlikely, but not impossible. They ran 52 plays, which is abysmal. Like, a good team will run 70-ish plays, 60, high 60, 70 plays. They'll go up tempo. They'll really, they'll shorten the clock. They'll do everything in their power to generate extra plays and extra possessions and extra drives to get there and deliver opportunities to win the football game. 52 plays in a team whose life is on the line is abysmal. Like, that is, honestly, that tells you everything you need to know about the Jets, because it's not the D. The D's not good. The D's good. The D is a good D. Yeah, you could say standards have slipped a little bit since Salah's left, but you have to say that actually the fact that there's no accountability there, that the offense is allowed to go out there and run 52 plays, that's shocking. Like, that is, honestly, I can't tell you how bad that is. I can't convey it enough. It's just an I don't care attitude. It's a laissez-faire, like, yeah, whatever, we'll stroll to the line. And you can see it in the tape. They're strolling to the line, they're walking around. There's no leadership on that team. There's no one sitting there saying, that's our standards, that's our careers, and like, we're not playing for it. And it's a bit of a joke. And you sit there and you think, you're Aaron Rodgers, you're supposed to be the guy leading this. This is what they're paying you 160 odd million for. Like, you're supposed to be that guy. You got to lead by example. He wanted to do the Tom Brady thing. I'm going to bring all my friends. And the difference between Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers is Tom Brady knew who to bring, and he bought the culture, which is why after he left, the Bucs still won divisions. He changed the culture of the franchise. That franchise didn't go to the playoffs for 13 years. They brought him in. Okay, the first year they didn't win the division, but they won the Super Bowl. So you can allow that. For every year since, they've won the division. He changed the culture of the franchise with the same players. And you're sitting there like, that's what you're paying the money for. And they only pay Brady 25, 30 mil a year. Not what Rodgers is getting. He was older, granted, but listen, that's what you're paying the money for. If you want to be that guy, that's what you've got to bring. It's not just your performance. It's the performance of everybody around you. You've got to lift everyone up. It's proof here that he has a worse record in New York than Mac Wilson and Zach Wilson, not Mac Wilson. Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold does at this stage.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which is just that.
It's awful.
He's got a better team. He's got a better team than those two, especially Darnold. He's got a better team than Darnold had.
He's also got a better team than they had when they were playing as well. Like, at every position, they have better players. And yet, Zach Wilson, who everybody has hated on for not being what they drafted, agreed his play at BYU was, it's hard to read because we're an independent, and basically chose their schedule. But when people give him that much hate, and his record is now almost nearly twice as good as a Jet as Aaron Rodgers, you're like, come on, something needs to change. We saw it last year, though, with Russell Wilson in Denver. Yes, he's gone to Pittsburgh and had a bit of a revival, but last year, Russell Wilson and his culture was not fit for Denver and destroyed Denver as an organization for a year.
And to squaring the circle, that's why Joe Douglas has to be fired, because he has brought that into the organization. And it's the same way that if they'd not shipped Wilson out, same thing, although they had to take the money hit. But whatever, they recognized that Wilson wasn't good in Denver for the culture, and they shipped him out. Controversial as that decision is, with all you paid, I really respect the Denver Broncos because they're reaping the benefits of that decision. Because they could have just sat there and they could have played Wilson and they could have tanked the franchise. Instead, they realized that, look, we spent those draft picks. They're gone. There's nothing we can do. Like, we can't change that. It's a sunk cost. So we just have to get out. Like, he is not for us. So, yes, they made a really bad decision in bringing him in. but they made a really smart decision in cutting him and going, let's draft a new quarterback, and let's see what happens. And credit to Bo Nix. We talked about Bo Nix and his experience. The guy played 60-odd games in college. You can't buy that experience. And he has come in and he's looked like a seasoned pro.
Yeah.
He can hold his head up high. He has made that offense more than functional. It's exciting. Like, if you're a Broncos fan like you are, it's an exciting time to be a Broncos fan, because I don't think anybody gave the Broncos a chance of making the playoffs. And now they look pretty set on making it. It's not a done deal, but they're in a good position. They should finish with a winning record, which, given where they were, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And yes, the defense is a big part of that. But you have to give Bo Nix his flowers. Like, he has done a really, really good job. He might not win offensive MVP or offensive player of the year, rookie offensive player of the year, but he'll be in the conversation. It'll be him or Jaden Daniels. And both of them, if you could ever split the award, this would be the year to do it, because I think both guys have been exceptional, really, for what they brought to the league and the standards and the way that they have elevated their teams. Both their teams were not in good places, and now look at where they are now.
Yeah. I saw a stat today that said Bo Nix has won, Denver have won more games or equaled games by 15 or more points since we've drafted Bo Nix than Daniel Jones has with the Giants in his entire time with the Giants. And
Yeah.
I mean, whether or not Daniel Jones has been a success or a failure is not for me to comment at this point in the show, but I had my reservations about Bo. I think everybody did. Anyone who saw him play at Auburn could probably attest to that. I think that's I don't think I'm being hard on him or unfair, but
No.
When you then go and do what you do at Oregon, and it was at Oregon, right? Bo Nix did. Yeah, I mean, that Oregon, you got to give props to Oregon. I mean, what they're doing at the moment with Dylan Gabriel is it's phenomenal.
But we've talked about Oregon before. We talked about this with Justin Herbert, and there was just something about that particular way that they're coached and the way they coach quarterbacks. It actually doesn't levy them well for the NFL. So that the way that they have to, they do like a 3-step drop as opposed to a 5-step or a 7-step drop. And so what happens is you don't get to see the mobility of the quarterback. You don't see how they can evade pressure, how they can escape the pocket. You have no idea. You don't see it with Gabriel. You didn't see it with Bo Nix. We didn't see it with Justin Herbert. And it was only when we looked at Herbert in the pro days and the combines, my biggest question on Herbert was his mobility. It's, can he actually move? Because you can never see it. Wasn't on tape. You couldn't see it. It doesn't exist in the system. And that was my same question with Bo Nix. And then week 2, the way that he evaded pressure from Tampa and the way that he pretty much won that game on it. I mean, the defense did a great job to shut down the Bucs, don't get me wrong. But in terms of the way that he controlled that offense and the way that he ran, I was like, I didn't think he could do that. So, like, he has this rush again. And that's something that people don't know. And that's all because of what happens there with Oregon and their system. So just because he never did it in college, it doesn't mean he can. And this is where this one of the things about the combine that is important is to see people outside of a structured scheme.
Yep.
And that's what you need to see. Like, again, that's what we'll need to see from Gabriel. Can he actually move? I think he can, but I think you need to see it. Moving on back onto Daniel Jones, because there's big news with him this week. He has been, he's basically been reduced to the 3rd string. So this is a contract decision. So why this has happened is people go like it's because Daniel Jones is no good. I think we can all agree that Daniel Jones is a better quarterback than Tommy DeVito, Andrew Luck. I think regardless of how low esteem you have for Daniel Jones, I think you can accept that he is a better quarterback than those two. So the reason why the organization have basically made this decision is his 2025 contract is guaranteed against injury. So if he continued to play out the rest of the season and got injured, say an ACL tear, then the Giants are on the hook. So what the Giants are now telling the world is they're going to cut Daniel Jones. This is very similar to what happened with Russell Wilson. They did the same thing with Russell Wilson because his contract was protected against injury. So they removed him from the situation so they didn't risk him to injury. So it's not to say that he is not good enough right now. It's not to say that his conduct is in question. It's purely a cash decision. The players, this is according to Jordan Schultz, are livid. They're absolutely livid that Daniel Jones has been benched for money. Because what you're effectively telling the team is this season's done. We're out. We're out. And so you have to tell a bunch of professionals who are effectively giving up their lives. I know they're well compensated, but they're effectively, you're telling them that what happens on the field doesn't matter because we're not going to field our best players. And that's a really hard thing to do. You know, the amount of people that come and talk about tanking. Oh, we should tank to get the one pick. Like, I have I literally philosophical hatred of tanking. I hate it. I hate the idea of it in professional sport. Fantasy football, different story because there's nothing really on the line but money. So if you trade assets to try and rebuild, I don't have a problem. I'm talking about professional sports. If you're going out there and you're going to tell the team that actually the results on the field don't matter and actually your job doesn't matter, do you really expect that player to turn back up the next season and be fired up and ready to go?
Nope.
So you might as well cut the whole team because you've just killed the culture. So everyone that talks about, oh, we should tank, we should go for the one pick. First of all, the success rate of organizations picking in the NFL draft is certainly not a sure thing. So you're sitting there like, oh, well, that's, you know, I had this in the Bucks chat, right? Someone came to me in the Bucks chat and was like, oh, we should tank. I'm like, why the hell would we tank? Look at our schedule. And I'm not saying this is like a blind faith guy. We have beaten the number 1 seed in the NFC and the number 2 seed in the NFC this season. Yes, we're 4-6. That's not great. But our schedule, I've just said, has 6 of our remaining 7 games are against teams that have 3 or 4 wins or less. Like, why are you giving up the season? We've just beaten the 1 seed and we've beaten the 2 seed. If we make the playoffs, we can beat anyone on the NFC side. If we make the Super Bowl, it's a one-off game. All bets are off. Like, you can sit there and do what you do. Like, the pathway to the Buccaneers in the Super Bowl is not crazy. Like, because they're the only team to beat the Lions, and they're one of only 2 teams to beat the Eagles. And they destroyed the Eagles. That game wasn't even close. Like, the Lions game was close, but the Eagles game wasn't. So I sit there and think, like, why would you tank? It's like we could genuinely do quite well. Like, as deluded as that sounds, we could genuinely do quite well. It's like, oh, but we can go and get like a top 5 pick, and you're like, but the positions we need, we can get them later on in the draft. Like, top 5 is if you need a quarterback or offensive line. Like, that's really what is at the top of this draft this year.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're not unhappy with the quarterback, why would you tank? Like, everyone's saying, like, oh, the Jaguars should tank. Well, they've just paid Trevor. What's the point in tanking?
Yeah.
What's the point? You're going to pick in the top 5 because your team's crap anyway. So you don't need to tank. You're still finishing the top 5 or 6, and you don't need a QB. If anything, you could trade down and get more assets. But I just fundamentally hate this idea of tanking. Like, it just annoys me because you're basically telling all the players on that roster that your job isn't, that it doesn't matter. And then you've destroyed the culture. The culture's gone. Like, even if you bring a new coach, then you have to rebuild that. So you're not writing off this season, you're writing off next season because you have to rebuild that culture. See, it's not like a 4 or 5 game tank. It's a 2-year tank.
A 2-year tank.
But that's what it is, because you're basically telling the players, like, next season, you have to undo everything. And you could bring in new coaches and all of that, but there's no instant success. They have to learn the playbook. They have to learn the schemes. They have to learn the new training methods. They then have to build that confidence back up and build that belief back up. Like if someone told anyone in your walk of life that, hey, your job doesn't matter, how would you take it? Like you'd be out, you'd leave, you'd go to another job.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have that kind of self-pride. If my boss phoned me tomorrow and said, I just don't think what you do is important, I'd be gone. I'd be gone in a month.
Yeah.
I'd be gone because I don't want that. Like no one wants that. Like there's very much that human side of things that I think people just go, oh, well, tank. And then also, if your team is that bad, do you really trust the current GM to pick right? You're that bad because he hasn't built a good team.
Yeah.
So if you tank, there's no guarantee you can do. We're well off the rails. That's my soapbox moment. I hate this idea of professional sports teams tanking. It rarely works, and it rarely makes any sense.
Hey, look, listen. This is the reason we do the flagship show in the middle of the week, because we can get off piste, and it's fine. Is this a real early public announcement for Malik Neighbours next year being worse than he was this year because he's playing for an organisation that has no call whatsoever?
That's unfortunately in this situation, it's really hard because his season now is done. Like he will regress massively through no fault of his own. And then what happens with the coaching staff? Is the ball there next year? Probably not. Is the GM there next year? Probably not. So then you're going to have to pay. And then what do they do at quarterback? Do they go rookie quarterback? Or do they go seasoned veteran quarterback? Because if they go seasoned veteran quarterback, then that changes the landscape, because then all of a sudden you've got a respectable pass catcher who's probably going to be an upgrade on what you had this year. And then they have to go, well, all wheels. And it depends on the offense. That's such an ambiguous question. It's like, I don't know. It's like people asking me what Chris Godwin's 2025 dynasty value is. I don't know what team Chris Godwin's going to be on next year. He's out of contract. You would like to think he'd be with the Buccaneers. I hope.
Yeah.
But that is not done. And until it's done, if he's on the Buccaneers next year, to the moon, if you're hedging and you're thinking, I want to get out, not a bad time to sell, because you can sell into the uncertainty. But if you've got someone half savvy who's looked at the contract situation and gone, well, I don't know if he's going to be in the same situation next year, then you go, well, then that's your value gone. So it's a tough one to say. Like, for me, I think one of the areas of fantasy football that people don't do enough analysis on is what the front office is doing. So when you look at if you look at what we talked about this season, and you look at the players that we talked about in real detail, like wax lyrical, Alvin Kamara, we talked about in such a positive fashion, because it's like the offense, other than the offensive coordinator, has not drafted a soul. They didn't bring anyone in free agency. They didn't draft anyone important. That tells you they're going to run the same personnel. Now, there was argument that maybe they'll bring it, like Kendra Miller will come along and he'll take some touches from Alvin Kamara. I was like, well, they haven't added to pass catchers, so I don't know if I buy that. And that's what's happened. Chris Godwin, we were saying, well, Liam Cohen from that Rams offense, and look at what he did with Cooper Kupp. And that's the role. He's going into that sort of Cooper Kupp role where he's going to get targeted a shed ton, I think was the scientific term that we put behind it. And that's what happened, because it was an understanding of what the play caller was going to do and understanding of the scheme. And these are the things that fantasy players, I think, can get better at, is understanding what the front offices are doing, understanding the fundamentals of, don't just like a player because he was drafted high in the draft. Why was he drafted? What's he going into? What sort of scheme? And it's hard. Like, it is genuinely really hard. You know, one of the things we talked about with Marvin Harrison Jr. was his price is so high in redraft, he'd have to have the best rookie season of all time to justify that tag. And I could never see it, because, to be honest, Arizona have been better than we thought, but they also haven't done anything revolutionary on offense. So it's like, was he in a situation that he could go and have the best fantasy season of all time as a rookie? No, was the answer. So You couldn't draft him at that point. Dynasty, different aspect. You're buying a long-term outcome. But in redraft, he was always overdrafted because that outcome wasn't available, because it was just never going to happen in Arizona. And I think that's the part that when we do all the shows, all the work in the off season and all the content that people either dip in and listen to, and that's why I think our listeners do well in charity drafts and they do well in their leagues. It's not because they care and they're taking all the extra advice and they're listening not just to us but to other outlets, but it's because we're giving them content that is different in the sense of we're not sitting here saying pick this player and here's why. It's we like these situations and here's why. And we're talking about the higher level, which is the front office. We're talking about scheme. We're talking about coaching. We're talking about these things that are important. And we try and do it not too much to where it tunes off everybody. We try and find a balance. But I think those things are ultimately important. And I get asked this question all the time. How do I get better at fantasy football? It's like, you have to understand how franchises work. You have to understand the salary cap. You have to understand front office. Like, if you can get to there and you have a genuine passion, your knowledge, and this is where, like, shout out to Dynasty Island, Rich Cooling. He is mega hot on this stuff. Like, he is anticipating franchise moves based on salary cap, based on salary situations. Like, his front office knowledge is incredible. And that's why he's such a good dynasty player, because he sees the bigger picture. It's not just this player was drafted in the first round, therefore they're good. Or this player was drafted and they had these combine metrics or this spark score. It's like, all that's fine, but what are they going into? Because for every success story of someone drafted high, you've got a Jalen Reagor. You've got these players who are drafted high. Jonathan Mingo. You've got all these players that are drafted high that do nothing, because you have to understand everything else that goes with it.
Jalen Reagor.
Yeah, arguably one of the worst first-round wide receivers we've ever seen, especially in the last 10 years.
Yeah,
I think he's probably the worst
easily.
wide receiver in the last 10 years.
Easily.
But I don't know how much of that's his fault. Like, that's my problem. How much of that is his fault? Like, I go with the same with Trey Lance. You know, when Trey Lance was how many times did I get crucified for saying I would have taken Mac Jones over Trey Lance? Like, I got killed. But Trey Lance he played one game in 2 years. Like, you're betting in the equivalent of a farmers league. Like, he's playing Division 2 ball. Like, he's so far from the pros. Like, he's one up from high school. Like, you're manifesting an outcome based on coaching, which is fine, but and statistics of being, and you're just like, that's fine, but the relevant body of work ain't there. Give me a Bo Nix who's played 60 games in college at a good level, a really good standard, over Anthony Richardson, over Trey Lance, over all of those players.
Yeah.
Because you can't buy experience of just playing the game. Like, for me, Bo Nix came into the NFL as a third-year veteran of the NFL. Because he played that many games at a high level.
Yeah.
Like, he's not scared. like he's looking at it. He's not scared. He's not scared of coverage. He's not scared of getting hit. He played 60 games. He's been through it all. Yeah, he's not done it at the NFL, but... And there's a level up, and it takes some finding, and that's why he was inconsistent first half of the season. But I never thought he ever looked that out of his depth.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Murph, the rails. We might as well be a car now. We're not even on the rails, or a boat. That's even further from a train. Come on then. Yeah. Let's get back to what do you want to talk about for the next 20 odd minutes.
Okay, let me just rattle through some things. So I'll talk about things that have surprised me. I'll talk about some things I've learned, and then I'll talk about some trends to monitor. Right. So I'll start with things I learned. So let's talk about Christian McCaffrey. I had a few people ask me this week about Christian McCaffrey. He's like, is Christian McCaffrey, like, how's he played? What's he like? Are we thinking he's a good buy? Is he someone that we can think could go and be a league winner? We know he's done it in the past, but where is he at now physically in that offense? I'm here to tell you folks that Christian McCaffrey is back, and I'm surprised at how back he is. So at the weekend, he played 94% of snaps, 69% of routes. He had 12 targets, 10 receptions. Sorry, that's in 2 games. So in 2 games, he's had 94% of snaps, 69% routes. He's had 12 targets and 10 receptions. And he's running well. The efficiency's there. Like, he is playing as the 101 already. Now, that's just a bit of a shock to me because I thought there would be some lag. I know he's experienced, but I thought there'd be a couple of games to get back in, similar to what we saw with like Nico Collins this week, right? Who wasn't out half as long. I thought there'd just be a bit of lag time to get to where he needs to get to. That's not happened. Great. So for me, like I got asked a question on Blue Sky about like who to trade for. If you're in a dynasty league and you've got someone who's been killed by CMC, like I think CMC probably has, let's say, an 18-month window. Well, not even that. 14-month window left of elite performance. It's about as far as I'd be willing to go. If you get more out of that, great, but that's the window you're trading him for. So I was asked, what would you trade for him for in Dynasty? I'd still be comfortable if I was contending because of the level he's at now, and I was going to win, make the final of this. And that's hard to project, but right, if I'm projecting to win it, I'd be comfortable in a 12-team Dynasty League to give up a first and a second for him. And the reason why I'd be comfortable with that is your second round pick will be pick 24, 23, 24. Ain't all that valuable. We know that picks out after pick 20 are dust, really. You're just throwing it up into the ether. So you're not missing that much, right? Not all second round picks. In fact, for me, second round picks have the greatest variance. The 201 is highly valuable. The 212 is worth next to nil. So I think you have quite a wide range of value. So it's like, oh, well, he's worth a second, but you can trade on that value because people think, oh, a second's really good. I tell you now, the 24th pick is pretty crap. Let people think it's better than what it is because it's not good. So trade it. So that's what I would do. I'd trade a first and a second to try and win it now. I think it's a good price. I think you can. I wouldn't pay much more than that because you're buying a 1-year window. But if you think you can win now and that's the missing piece, that's the kind of value I'm putting on him. I don't think you're going to get him in a redraft league. I don't know what cost it. Like people are like, oh, what would it cost in a redraft league to get? I honestly don't know because if a team has got a chance of making the playoffs, they're not going to trade him. If the team's already in the playoffs, they're not going to trade him. And the team is out of the playoffs, they're not going to trade with you because they're out of the playoffs.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that ship has sailed. Like it's really hard. Like I think for me, the reason why someone was saying to me the other day, like, why is the trade window in redraft leagues like week 10, week 11? I'm like, because at this point in the season, most outcomes are determined. And the ones that aren't are the ones that aren't going to trade. Because if you think about it, the teams at 10 wins, 9 wins, 8 wins aren't going to trade because they're pretty happy with their roster. And they're playing for nothing for the next 3 weeks. So they're not going to inherit the injury risk. The teams at the bottom end aren't going to trade because their season's over. They're probably not even setting lineups anymore. And so then the teams in between, let's say there's 4 or 5 teams that are kind of on that bubble for a couple of spots, aren't going to trade with each other because they're not going to try and risk strengthening another team. So that's why trades kind of die off at this stage. So redraft trades very nigh on impossible to do at this stage of a season. Like, you're just not going to get any done. So you have to do redraft trades. Picks are really the only commodity I think you can ship, or older veterans. So I think if you've got a team that isn't going to make the playoffs, start shipping the older veterans, start getting some actualization value off them, and then start trying to accumulate picks. That's kind of the best way of doing it. I've started calling Javonte Williams the Terminator because he just won't die. So I pretty much held a funeral for him a week ago. I was like, he's done. Like, I wore black. I was like, it's it. He's finished. Like, he's done. And then he's the lead back again. Like, he's like freaking Terminator, man. Like, what the heck? It's like, what a Bronco smoking, man. Like, why is he back?
Good stuff. We're smoking the good stuff.
I don't get it. Like, I don't get it. It hurts my tiny brain that he ran 52% of snaps, 43% of routes, 13 touches, and he's now the lead back. Like, why?
I don't think we can. I think Sean Payton's doing stuff that we can't fathom at the moment, and
He's always done stuff
unfortunately,
I can't fathom. So that's fine.
I know. He's Terminator. I like it. I thought you were going to go with that "I'll be back" kind of thing, but you just went with "You can't kill him." So no, fair enough.
No, he is Terminator. Taysom Hill. Right. So this is a really interesting one. People want to know people that you can try and trade for or on your waiver wires. If Taysom Hill is on your waiver wire this week, just go and add him. Yes, he's on buy. Just stash him. Here's why. Taysom Hill had 5 receptions, 1 rush attempt, and 2 pass attempts in the first quarter of their game. Right? So Darren Rizzi, who, by the way, is the special teams coordinator, knows Taysom Hill very well, has decided, hey, for shiz and giggles, I'm just going to roll up Taysom Hill. Like, he's my offense. So if people have dropped Taysom Hill after what he did last week, I'm not saying that 30, 40 point week, whatever scoring format you're on, is going to happen again. But what I am going to say is he's very, like, that first quarter, like, script and how much he got action says to me that, hey, this guy's like a key part of this offense. So, I just keep an eye out. Anyone that dropped him, you need to go pick him up. I would say he's a top 5 tight end rest of the season.
Is it?
He is. But he's not a tight end.
No. I am completely on board with this. But he is that ultimate player that you will play him this week and nothing will happen. It's good.
Well, he's on bye this week, so of course.
But no, but you know what I mean. That you get that week, and then Taysom Hill does what every good player of that, I want to say caliber, but the
tight end position's garbage anyway, so it doesn't matter. Like, you risk to reward is virtually nil. And in fact, in Superflex leagues where you're having to roll out Cooper Kupp, Mac Jones, or Cooper Rush, Mac Jones, if you're playing Tommy DeVito this week, the only reason you're playing Tommy DeVito this week is he's your only starting quarterback. If you're playing him in a Superflex, then man,
I think I'm playing Cooper Rush as my second quarterback in the Superflex this week.
Yeah, I can just about get on board with Cooper Rush as a second quarterback because he actually at least threw for 300 yards. I can about get on board with that. I can't get on board with Mac Jones. I can't get on board. I'm in a league where I had to play Mac Jones last week. I had no choice, and it sickened me. Like, I felt ill. But anyway, yeah. So Taysom Hill in your Superflex, not bad. Lamb McConkey is a bona fide stud, right? He's made me look stupid. So in my matchup column, I was sitting there like, Mike Hilton, yes, the rest of the Bengals defense is garbage. I get it. But Mike Hilton's had a really good year. He's second best corner in fantasy points per route run against. Like, he's been a stud all year. He's not getting targeted. And Jim Harbaugh's like, I don't care. I'm just going to make him look idiot. Like, Lamb McConkey against Mike Hilton. And basically, he got home. He emptied his pockets from his 9 targets, 135 air yards, 123 receiving yards a day. And he found Mike Hilton at the bottom of his pocket. Like, he absolutely took he made Mike Hilton look average. Like, he wasn't just exclusively Mike Hilton, by the way. But there were parts he was like, well, what? He completely destroyed him. Like, he made Mike Hilton look average. I'm like, I know Mike Hilton sometimes gets done a bit by pace, but that was wild. Like bona fide, like, Lamb McConkey's a stud. Like, I know that's not groundbreaking, but I think I'm at the point now I can say he's pretty much like matchup proof. I'm slightly concerned with Jalen Hurts. It's the 6th straight game with fewer than 30 pass attempts. There's some reason to that, in the sense of they've played literally no one. Like, their schedule has been a joke. like really bad. So that kind of makes sense. But a 12.5% passing rate over expected, minus 12.5%. So that crushes his ceiling. And then basically you have to be really careful about starting Dallas Goedert and or Devonta Smith. And basically what you have to do is look at it and go, are the Eagles going to be in a competitive game this week? So look at the over-unders. If the over-unders are at 42 and below, that says Jalen Hurts isn't going to throw the ball 30 times. You start breaking down the targets. A.J. Brown's going to get 10. Then you look at the incompletions, and you're sort of thinking, what's the pathway to Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert? It's not good for both of them. So then you have to really start drilling down as to who's got the pathway. They do have some tougher games coming up because, my God, it couldn't get any easier. But having said that, just a little thing to watch out for. It. You just have to kind of tread that line a bit carefully. I wrote on Blue Sky this week about Juwan Jennings, and I was like, and I think we talked about it on here, like Juwan Jennings last week. I was like, you need to go get him, trade for him, do whatever you do. He had 11 targets. He's definitely like the go-to guy in San Francisco. If you got Tyler Lockett, I'm starting to think that his value is, I won't say dead, but I'd say he's probably on life support in Seattle. Jackson Smith and Jigba's kind of just taken over. So JSN had 4 huge receptions on that game-winning drive at the end. So when the game's close, Tyler Lockett's not a thing. And so that is kind of, you've got to be a bit careful now. If you've got Tyler Lockett shares, I don't think I could trust him going in the lineups. David Njoku, he went 9 for 9. 9 targets, 9 receptions. But his air dart was a whopping 2.3. But so he's basically the check down guy. It's, oh no, the pass rush has got to us quick. Lob it to Njoku. But he's a massive yards after catch guy. So there's a lot of benefit to that. But hey, 9 for 9 in bloody tight end is great. Like, you take that all day long. So I think he's questionable. I hope he's okay. Talk about your Broncos. Jerry Jeudy, loads of early opportunity. Ex-Bronco. I know he's with the Browns now, but I'm just so used to him being a Bronco because of how excited I was that he went there and the draft night and everything. 11 targets, 146 air yards. Like, he's going to be the key guy for James Winston, especially early game, like game script. Everyone kind of thought it was going to be Tillman. I think now with the bye, they've kinked it to go Jeudy. Robert Dunze in the box score didn't look great, but he did have 10 targets, 113 air yards under their new OC. So, it's kind of one of those that the peripherals are there. The results will come later. Talked about J.K. Dobbins. His snap share went up to 73%. But Gus Edwards did start, and he got the early work. But obviously, Dobbins is just the better fit. We saw that Marshawn Lloyd has got appendicitis after they opened the 21-day window to return from IR, which is a bit tricky. And that Chris Brooks has overtaken Emmanuel Wilson for the number 2 job. All this means is that Josh Jacobs is going to be a stud rest of the season. 80% snaps, 8 high-value touches. He's in good spot. Jameson Williams balled out. I predicted he'd ball out. He did. 6 targets, 70 air yards. He really did a great job. Khalil Shakir is still the guy you want to own in that team, really, for now. Amari Cooper's coming along, but...
Amari Cooper's catch the weekend was unbelievable.
But again, having said that, just not enough consistency. He's a bit of a rotational player still at the moment. And then the Jags, we're at this point now with the Jags where it's effectively just Evan Ingram. I don't think you can start anyone else until Trevor's back. Like, I fully expect Doug Pederson, Trent Baalk, and Press Taylor to get fired over the next week. I'm surprised they've not done it yet. Maybe they've decided to give them the bye week to, I don't know, say hello to their families and do the personnel stuff, and they're keeping it all like hidden and stuff and transitioning them out, and then they're going to announce it. But I don't think Doug Pederson is back for week 13. If he's back for week 13, I genuinely have no idea what the Jags is doing. I don't like, and it's not all on Doug. He's a nice guy and everything, but Press Taylor's the worst offensive coordinator in football. Trent Baalk is a joke. as a GM. He's an absolute joke. Like, I don't know how he's like the situations and contracts in that team is a joke. I don't understand how he analyzes talent. That's a joke. I don't actually know what Trent Bulk does, but he's not a GM. Like, he's just not. He's not a GM. So get rid. I did pull up some situational stuff on Fantasy Points. So I'll go for a few bits. Players that have forced a high number of missed tackles. James Conner massively out in front. See, he's forced 54 missed tackles, which is huge. Like it's absolutely massive. The next person on this list is Najee Harris with 40. So he's huge out. But also respect to Najee Harris, because everyone's kind of thinking like, oh, he's done. He's not going to do much. And he's really having a good season. All the peripherals there. Kenneth Walker's up there. Bijan Robinson. Derrick Henry. Guy 7th on this list is Bucky Irving. And so he's going to get a lot more attention on that. So I do think you're going to see Bucky Irving more coming out of the bye. So that's the sort of signal up in his way. What I would say as well, when I look at things like the TD rate, that's what's propping up David Montgomery. If you take away his touchdowns, his value massively sinks. So in games where perhaps they don't have as much riding on it, what happens to David Montgomery? He kind of falls down like a house of cards. So it's just a few little pieces there to keep an eye on. I was looking at for receivers, right? So what I was really keen to understand was targets per route run. And now, just as I say that, Fantasy Points has just crashed on me. It's the second time today it's done that, which is really frustrating. So I got to reload it. I got to pull it. Right, so targets per route run. So this is effectively why this is really important, and yards per route run. This is going to tell you sort of how much players are kind of earning their targets. Leading players this year, Rashee Rice was at 35% targets per route run. Puka Nacua, 34%. Cooper Kupp, 33%. I'm excluding anyone that's run only like a handful of routes. Malik Neighbors, 33%. Josh Downs, this is why I'm highlighting it. Josh Downs' target per route run. He is the guy in that offense. We're seeing it all the way through. He's getting the targets. He's earning it in every which way. But also, just keep an eye on, and there's sort of like as a handcuff wide receiver, if there's such a thing, in Dontavian Wicks. When he is on the field, has a 30% targets per route run. He's only run 142 targets. Talk about guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown are upwards of like 260 routes. So he's not running anywhere near as much. He's kind of running at like 40%-ish at the time, high 40s, 50% of the time, which isn't enough as a sustainability. But if there's an injury to Jaden Reed or Romeo Dobbs, Dontavian Wicks is going to go to the moon. So if you're a high win team, 8 wins, 9 wins, 10 wins, you're going to the playoffs, just stash Dontavian Wicks because he should be on most waivers. His route percentage is 43.8%. So just stash Dontavian Wicks, because if that route rate goes higher and that targets per route run stays roughly the same, he's going to go to the moon. So just a little stash play there. Same goes for Adonai Mitchell. We're starting to see that more and more. He's at the same 30% target per route run. He's still at only 35% of routes, but I'm seeing an increase week on week. He might be this other stash play late in the season for wide receivers. So just stash him. If you've got a decent enough size bench, you might not, and that's fine. Those are a couple of players I'd be looking to just sort of stash. Why this number is important is we point to a guy like Will Dissly. So Will Dissly's only on the field 50% of the time, although that's gone up a bit more. Already reached 50% of the time. His targets per route run is 0.29. That's why he is in this upward trajectory of starting tight ends. So, really, really key. When we look at yards per route run, this is really important because it's telling you about that big play ability, right? So it's telling you about players who, when they get the ball, are going to get you big plays. So I'm just going to go to route numbers here. So like Nico Collins, 3.57 yards per route run. That's massive. AJ Brown, 3.51. Puka Nacua 3.16, Justin Jefferson 2.91. You can see that the commonality. Juwan Jennings 2.84. I mean, that's huge yards per route run. So it's a really big signal. Who else is up in here is Mike Evans. If you can get a trade done for Mike Evans, that might be a really good piece to go after. So there's a really key sort of outliners with these numbers that are really important. I want to talk about separation score for a second, which is a really cool metric that the guys over at Fantasy Points have. So what I did is I excluded all the no-hopers, so people that run a minimum amount of routes. And what I did is started digging into their separation score man versus zone, so that when you start to analyze who plays a lot in zone versus who plays a lot in man, where there's opportunity, right? Players that are just phenomenal in man coverage. Zay Flowers, number 1, followed by Mike Evans, followed by Mark Andrews. So there, but then here's my guy, Lad McConkey, right? Number 5 on this list. Luke McCaffrey is there, but I mean, his win rate's significantly lower than everybody else's. So he separates, but he doesn't get found, basically, is what we're telling you here. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Brian Thomas is on this list, but with Mac Jones, that's not valuable. When he gets to Trevor Lawrence, that's valuable. Keep in mind that man coverage is at best a defense at a top end is only playing that about 30% of the time, and at a low rate is probably around about 10% of the time. So it's nice, but it's how meaningful that is slightly less than what it means for zone coverage, right? So players that are best in zone coverage, and this is a big part of Jameson Williams' success. So Brandon Ayuk's number 1 on this list. He's not playing for the rest of the season. Jameson Williams is number 2, and his win rate is pretty high. He's the only other player above 20% when I put a certain amount of filters in, which is minimum of 75% of routes against zone. Amon-Ra St. Brown is 3rd on this list, by the way, is Michael Wilson of Arizona. So again, it's another player who's getting heavily separated, not getting found against zone coverage. Noah Brown, that's a little bit of why you're starting to see some success with him. But again, Mike Evans. So Mike Evans is 6th on this list. So he's high up in man, he's high up in zone. So what that's telling you is, don't matter. He's going to win, and he wins at a really, really high rate. So Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin, going to get more targets. He's a huge, huge piece moving forward, and that's a huge thing to look at. When I then zero in on red zone, right, and this is a good one. If you want to understand why Nick Westbrook-Akeen is now a thing in fantasy football, it's because he wins in the red zone. It's a very small number of routes, but his separation score is just miles off the charts of everybody else. So is Calvin Ridley. Both those guys are well out in front, which is why you're seeing success at that part of the field. Same goes for like Cooper Kupp, which is why he gets a lot of red zone targets. Travis Kelce, similar. That's why these guys run a lot of routes and get a lot of targets in the red zone, because they're getting that success. They separate in the red zone a lot better than anybody else. I'm conscious of time, so I just want to go through 2 more things, because I just want to make sure we're giving people like proper insight as to what we need. We won't do snaps. That's not as important. That's crashed. Good old fancy points. Don't let me down now. Right. So let's look at a couple of things I want to highlight is touches. This is really important that there's only one player in the last 10 years that's had over 400 touches in the season, and that was Christian McCaffrey in 2019. I tell you right now that some players that are on pace for that, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams is kind of on the cusp of that. Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry. These guys are already over 200 touches. Alvin Kamara is at 238. What that might mean is that their touches start to scale down a bit. So it's good because it means they're the main guy in their offense, which is grand. But on the negative side of it is if they're getting too much work, they're at risk of injury. They go into like this injury red zone kind of area, which we kind of don't want. And so you'll start to see touches like wane off a little bit in sustainability. So I'm a little bit concerned on Saquon Barkley. I think those touches will start to decrease, especially as they're in clinching scenario soon. So there's a slight worry for me that his performance will dip in the playoffs. That's not what Saquon Barkley fans will want to hear. But I'm just telling you now, I need you to have a plan B. Other than Kenneth Gainwell, try and think of a plan B. Don't rely on Barkley to win you a fantasy title. I am just a little bit concerned he could hurt you. Whereas at least players like Kamara and Williams, I think because they'll be playing for something near the end, I do think that those touches might not decrease at such a sharp level. Bijan Robinson, if they're playing for the division or if they've locked the division, can't get any better. Again, you might see those touches decrease. Derrick Henry, similar scenario, although they're in a real dogfight with their division, so maybe not. Breece Hall, do they shut him down for next year, given where they are? It's quite possible in a couple of weeks or so. Chuba Hubbard will see less work. Tony Pollard, do they shut him down? He's got a high number of touches as well. So just a few little pieces just to keep an eye on, just on those touch rates, which is really important. And then also on that is the run success rate, if I can find it, or rush success rate. Let me find it. I bet I can't find it now. No, my luck.
The Gremlins.
I do have one more thing I want to go through now and there. This chart is massive. That's why I'm struggling to find it. It's literally like huge. I can't find it. But what I will say is a quick one in terms of I always try and highlight expected fantasy points per game versus what they're actually scoring fantasy points per game, which I think is always really interesting. There's certain players that are diminished. So like Malik Neighbors doesn't score as many fantasy points as he should, which is obviously down to the offense. That number will continue to slide. Some are bang on, like Alvin Kamara is literally like bang on fantasy points versus expected fantasy points. You got players that are massively overperforming. One of those is Joe Mixon. Just keep an eye on that. Saquon Barkley is another one. They're massively overperforming in actual fantasy points per game to expected fantasy points per game. It means there's just a small risk of regression. So just keep a little eye on that. And then fantasy schedules for the rest of the season. Right. I'm just going to focus on two positions. I'm just going to focus on running back and wide receiver. I will do the rest in the Patreon cast this week. That's another reason to join. You can get a 1 week free trial. Get yourself set up, and I promise you it'll be worth the value. Teams that have got really good rushing schedules for the next few weeks, and I'm just going to set it for the rest of the season. The Lions have a really good schedule, so that's really good news for Montgomery and Gibbs owners. Kyron Williams owners will be delighted once they get through Philly this week. Their schedule really takes away. So Kyron Williams is potentially like a league winner for people. Aaron Jones is in a really good spot. Not a terrible last 2 weeks. Not outstanding, but they're not bad. So he should be in a good spot if he's monopolizing those touches. The Bucks' schedule is unreal, except for against the Chargers in week 15. So again, Bucky Irving, get him bought in, as well as also Rachaad White. Both those guys should see a nice amount of volume over the next 2 weeks, a few weeks even to the rest of the season, next 6 weeks. Teams have got it really hard. Najee Harris is a really bad schedule, so you might want to get out of the Najee Harris business fairly quickly. James Conner's schedule is really tough, so he could be a bit of a struggle. He's got a couple of games in a fantasy season, and your fantasy semifinals, he's got a massive plus matchup, but championship week he's against the Rams. That's really, really tough. Bijan coming off the bye, the first 2 games are really bad, but in the fantasy playoffs, he's in a really good spot. So you might need to just keep an eye on alternatives there. It's really good for Chase Brown. He's got a good schedule. You don't start the Broncos. Any of their running backs, stay well away, but they've got a really terrible playoff schedule. Really bad for running backs. And then going into wide receivers, and I'm going to analyze all the positions on the Patreon cast this week. So please do take a trial. You'll get access to that end of the week when I record it. You get access to all the rankings and everything else. So do check in and get into it, because it'll be really useful for you. When we look at wide receivers rest of the season, Teams that have got really, really good schedules. Calvin Ridley's schedule is massive. So is Mike Evans' schedule is really, really good. As is also Jaden Reed's. Once he gets past the next couple of weeks, it really turns up. The Bears, Roman Dunze's schedule is really nice, except for San Francisco week 14, but the rest of it's pretty good. So they're kind of the big ones. Jags is terrible. Just stay away. Just don't start any of them. The Rams' schedule's pretty tough. I don't love week 16 against the Jets, but hopefully they phoned it in and go home. But that could be a tricky one for Puka Nacua. I think Cup's pretty matchup proof. I think Nacua is almost, but yeah, the volume might just go down a little bit there as well. Jordan Addison, there's a lot of talk about adding Jordan Addison this week. I'm a bit precarious with this situation going on. They've got Chicago twice, which is a terrible matchup. Green Bay week 17, I'm not too keen on either. So I'm kind of like, might just stick with JJ. I think he's a bit of a risk going forward. I don't think there's much upside there as opposed to others. So just keep an eye on that one. And I think the only other team I'd call out here is the Browns. Their schedule takes a pretty nasty turn. So it's going to be a case of, I think Judy's the guy, Tillman, and I definitely don't think Elijah Moore is someone you want to get a big piece of now. And if you're hanging on to him, I don't think his season's going to pan out great towards the end, but famous last words. I'll leave it there because I think I don't want to. We're an hour 11 in. Someone's message just asking us that they want us to join their network. Thanks.
Cool, Sport Coin. Send us some Bitcoin and we'll gladly fly over. Yeah, I think, Murph, considering I managed to get 45 minutes of your time there and we hadn't covered anything, you've done very well to get that all into an hour and 11 minutes. So well done, sir. Well done indeed.
I think we just balance everything. But I'll one more announcement. Just final things for we'll open up the signups for FFCC 2025. So check out that. And someone asked me the question about content on X versus Blue Sky. I mentioned last week I'm doing more on Blue Sky. As most of you are probably aware, I nuked my Twitter account due to some pretty horrible things that were directed my way on Twitter, and I've actually just noticed that the platform is a pretty, I don't want to go as far as say it's a cesspool, but it's not a nice place to be at times as a content creator and putting things out there. And I think we're all about positive attitude and positive vibes, and a lot of things that get said are not kind. I find that people are very tick for tack. Anyway, I think the community's kind of plateaued, I think it's probably what I'm going to say. So I had a Blue Sky account about 18 months ago. And then I kind of let it die. And then when I deactivated Twitter, I went over there and there was no one there ultimately. Like, there was very few people on Blue Sky. It was like an invite only place. So there weren't many people on it. They opened up signups. And it's great. Like, honestly, it's like how Twitter was probably 10 years ago, in the sense of it's done by John Dorsey, who founded Twitter originally. So the fantasy community that's on Blue Sky, incredibly positive. Like, in terms of, we see more engagement in posts, we see more engagement in conversations, more friendly discussions. I haven't seen any real negative posts. See a couple of political posts that have been a bit questionable, but that is kind of it, literally like a couple. So I'm really enjoying Blue Sky. I recommend it to anybody who is in the fantasy space. You know, we're still going to post things on Twitter, but I think a lot of the musings, I sometimes go, oh, that's really interesting, and post it. I'm just not ever in a rush to do it on X because it's a pretty nasty place to be. And then I post something and like, I saw a post the other day that we put up, and it had something in the region of like 3,000 views and one like. And I'm like, is it just that it's garbage, or people just scroll it, or they're not engaging? Like, I've just seen the engagement numbers just like dwindle. And I think it's harder to cut through the noise and the crap on X, whereas actually now with a new fantasy space on Blue Sky, it seems that like there's far more engagement in the content. So yeah, I think for me, like that's a really big thing. So if you want to join in, and I'm not saying that we're only going to post on it, I think you'll see more of my personal thoughts on things on Blue Sky, because we don't have a 5-yard Blue Sky. It's just me. I will still post things on X from time to time, but it won't be as much, and it's purely because I don't see the engagement on it. Like someone messaged me like, "Oh, well, you're not going to do much on X." I was like, don't see the engagement. Like if you really like the content, then you should like it and post it. Like I'm not, and that's not a dig at anybody, but it doesn't feel like it's missed because no one likes it or comments on it anyway. It's just like, and I think this is a big lesson overall to people who, you know, we're not paid. Like any money that we earn from this goes back to either funding the equipment and funding stuff for this, or to listeners in prizes. Like that, we don't take a dime, Stocks and I, out of this. Like we don't make any money out of it. So the likes and the engagement, I guess it's more not even a validation of ego, because it's not that. We're not egotistical. It's more of a validation of what we're saying makes sense. Like you like it, and this isn't just for us, it's for any content creator. If you genuinely like something that they do, whether it's a podcast, whether it's an article, whether it's a post, whatever it is, a video, anything, 3 things I'm going to ask for everybody now to do. First of all, give the podcast a rate and review. Just helps some traction. But those messages of validation. It's like, hey, look, like it just, we're talking something that people like. That's nice. Second thing is just like the content or write a comment. And part of that is, for reach, but part of it is just, again, that validation of, hey, this was really good. Really appreciate it. The third is drop a note. Like I'm really lucky, and you don't see it as much, mate, but we do get like really good comments from the content that we do. It's just not public. It just all come privately, you know. And so I love that, and definitely keep them going. But yeah, positive comments publicly would also be really good. But just tell content creators, whether it's us, whether it's not us. I like anyone's content. Just tell them that you really appreciate it and like it, and it just goes a long way to making some of this worth it. Let's face.
Yep, it does. It does.
Yeah, I'll leave it there. But I feel like this week we've sharpened the pencils. There's 3 weeks to go. There's not long left. It's going to be an interesting rest of the season. Yeah,
there really is not long left at all. Although sharpened pencils, mine's like that one you had in your pencil case at art was about an inch long, but you've used it for absolutely ever, and it's just now you can just hold it between your fingertips, and there's not a lot left of that pencil because I've done a lot of sharpening this season, it feels like. But anyway, as Murf says, Rush Nation, there are 3 weeks left. Really is not long left. Let's try and add some ships to those docks, which we've filled up nicely over the previous years. That is going to do it for today's show, Rush Nation. Don't forget to head over to patreon.com/5yard rush. Join the 1 week free trial. As Murph says, it is well worth it for the content he puts out. But until next week, Rush Nation, as always, don't forget, keep rushing. There's that wave, baby. There's that wave.